Welcome to episode 6 of my origin story. Um, so, what have we got going on right now? We've got the Winter Olympics and all kinds of political turmoil. So, I would like to invite you all to come back in time with me to a simpler time, the 90s, when our biggest problems were Bill Clinton getting a blowjob from an intern, the AIDS epidemic, Tanya Harding hitting Nancy Kerrigan in the knees. Winter Olympics, good times. So, travel back in time with me to 1996, 97 ish, when I was 14 years old, and had just where we left off is I had just been caught with a little bit of skunk weed in my backpack at school, and I was arrested, handcuffed, and marched off campus during lunch. There's one piece I want to back up a little bit before I get to the arrests from the fallout. While I was waiting at school with the officer to formally be brought to the station and booked, they had me go and sit with the guidance counselor for a while, and she actually told me that the backpack search was not random, that I was actually targeted, that some people had expressed concern, and that's why they pulled me and some other people out, period. Oh my God. I've been talked to texting, so I just automatically added punctuation because I hurt my wrist. Anyways, so I had a pretty good idea who that might be, which was back in middle school. I had mentioned earlier I kind of had a falling out with my best friend from elementary school, Ashley, and started hanging out with sort of a little bit more like square, kind of nerdy theater kids. And when I got to high school and I got entangled with Brenda and Ray, I pretty much dropped that friend group. They were much more conforming and, like I said, square than the path I was headed down. And so it felt like we weren't connecting the same way. And also, I felt a little bit judged when I was around them. So I distanced myself from them. And I believe they interpreted this as like a fall from grace for me, when really it was just me trying to figure out my identity. And I think I was always on the path I was on. I'm not sure anything would have really changed that. So, anyways, so I just found out that I had been ratted out, probably by friends slash former friends, and got marched out to the police officer, to the police car, and handcuffed behind my back, taken to the station. And once I was at the station, they had me sit in a chair in some kind of room, and there was someone else there, I think also handcuffed. And the other officers, not the one that arrested me, but like the other officers there were like, "Oh, what are you in for?" And I said, "Pot, but I don't really smoke," or "it wasn't mine," or whatever I said. And they said, "Which is bigger, a gram or an ounce?" And I genuinely, at that time, did not know the answer to that question. So I said this. I don't know where I got this. I said, "Well, I think an ounce is like the weight of a paperclip. And so I'm going to say an ounce is smaller." And they all just busted up laughing at me because I guess I had just proven what an ignorant consumer of illegal substances I was. Yeah, I got booked in, ink fingerprints, mug shots. I have always wanted to try to find those mug shots, but now it's been like almost 30 years. I don't think they exist anymore, but that would have been pretty iconic. And my parents came. I actually don't even remember which one of my parents came to pick me up from the station, but I was there for a while. And by the time they came to get me, I had been so like emotionally and morally crushed that they, over what was to them, I mean, my parents are like hippies from the 60s, a pretty small indiscretion to have a little bit of weed, but they were pissed that I was arrested. I'm sure they were concerned that their child was potentially doing drugs. on the bright side, they never did a drug test like my mom had initially requested. I don't think they forgot. I genuinely am pretty sure law enforcement doesn't routinely drug test people unless there's a reason, like if you're driving under the influence or something like that. But possession alone doesn't trigger drug testing. So I was off the hook there because my mom forgot about it. But immediately, a lot of privileges were revoked. The hair dye appointment to get my purple streak was immediately canceled. Um, my goth friends were no longer allowed to come over to my house unless they had no face makeup on, and weren't dressed too crazily. So that immediately pretty much excluded Brenda from ever coming over. And I was no longer allowed to hang out down at Sacred Grounds. Now, Sacred Grounds was this super awesome coffee shop in downtown San Pedro, 6th and Mesa, and it was like a corner coffee shop, and they had all kinds of like open mic nights and cool bands playing, and it was just like a really great place for us kids to hang out after school or on the weekends. But somehow, I guess maybe because it was a bunch of punk and goth kids hanging out there, my dad said, "You're not allowed to go there anymore." So I wasn't grounded per se, but I was severely limited in my social options after that. I was immediately suspended. So that was it for me for school. And I had to have a hearing. So the good news here is that my uncle and his wife both they're retired now, but worked for the Los Angeles School District, LAUSD. And he was familiar with the procedure for things like expulsion or suspension, etc. And what the argument my teachers were making was that my school has a zero tolerance policy for drugs. And so I didn't know that. But what happened was we got like a hearing. So it was like a full on hearing with like multiple people representing the school district. They were going to interview me. And then I actually had to bring in like character witnesses. So I had to ask people to come in and testify on my behalf. It's like whether or not they've seen me using drugs, whether or not they think I'm a good person, blah, blah, blah. I don't remember who I had come testify other than my buddy Megan, who lives across the street, and I've known since I was like 3. And she happily came and testified on my behalf. And I'm fairly certain she had never seen me doing anything illegal because I wasn't going to ask anybody to like lie on my behalf. Anyways, so at the hearing, they're going blah, 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 zero tolerance policy. And I think my uncle was there, like representing me as well. And he said, "How would Nora have known about the zero tolerance policy?" And they said, "Well, we had an assembly about it." The assembly took place about a week after I was arrested. Maybe it was pre-planned, or maybe it was because I had been arrested. Who knows? But the point being, I did not go to that assembly. I had no way of knowing that. And so the deal that we struck was, rather than being expelled, which would go on my permanent record, I would be given an opportunity transfer. So I would be given an opportunity to transfer to another school. Unfortunately, it was mid-semester, and where I live, you do school districts based on your address. So there was no other school for me to go to at the time. So what we did was my parents enrolled me in independent studies. And independent studies was a complete joke. Absolutely joke. I would go to the office or the school, I don't remember where it was, once a week to check in, and they would give me my assignments for the week. And the assignments were literally, you can read this book or you can watch the movie. So the one I remember specifically was Of Mice and Men. So they're like, you can read Of Mice and Men or you can watch the movie. Well, what 14-year-old is going to choose to do anything other than watch the movie? So that was peak, educational efficiency. And they told me in independent studies that if I wanted to continue, I could have my high school diploma by the time I was 16 and be done with school. I was open to that idea. My dad was open to that idea. My mother said, abso-fucking-lutely not. She really, really felt that it was important for me to socialize and to be around other people my age, which I don't know, which would have been better. Neither was great for the social trajectory at the time. Um, but so we had to figure out how to get me into a different school. So I spent the rest of the school year, though, basically expelled slash suspended with very, very little to do with my time. And this creates sort of a problem, a paradox for a young person when all of their friends are at school all day and they're home alone bored because my parents were working. I naturally sought out people to hang out with during school hours, and the people that were available to hang out during school hours were other kids who had been expelled, kids who had dropped out, and older people, like young adults who were happy hanging out with 14-year-olds. So not the best influence crowd-wise. And ironically, getting expelled is what massively increased my marijuana consumption. I was bored, I had nothing to do, I had nowhere to be, and the people I was hanging out with were all stoners. So I was like, well, if you can't beat them, join them. And that was just a really chaotic time for me. I don't remember a lot of what I was doing. I do have one very specific memory that still kind of cracks me up to this day, which is that one of our good friends, actually, I mentioned her in the letter from Brenda, or Brenda mentioned her, Alicia. We called her Mommy because she was the elder goth, and so she was like the mother to the group. And after I got arrested, what she said to me was, boots or bra? How many times do I have to tell you? Keep your drugs in your boots or your bra. Which I actually had never received that advice, but, it was pretty funny. Anyway, so we were over at her house, and we were smoking pot on her porch, and her mother, I found out at that time, was a professional dominatrix. Now, I didn't know what that meant, so I had to go home and ask my mother, Mom, what's a dominatrix? And she explained it to me. And so the next time we were over at Alicia's house, hanging out on the porch smoking, her mom had some clients come over, and they, from what I could tell, they were gay men, and she would take them back into her bedroom slash, I guess, dungeon. And I don't know what was going on in there, but I did hear, like, you could hear some impact going on. And after she was done with that session, she was going to take her client, I think, home, but we wanted to ride somewhere. And so this is the interaction I remember. We were hanging out on the porch. Alicia's mom came out, and Alicia said to her mom, do you want some pot? And her mom said, oh, God, no. Last time I tried to drive high, I was going 5 miles an hour on the freeway. So she declined, and we got in the car, and it was me, Alicia, it was in the front seat, her client, kind of effeminate gay man in the back seat, and also sitting back there with us was this guy who was also queer and gender nonconforming and liked to play with gender fluidity and stuff, and he would wear dresses and skirts to high school. It's actually weird if I think about it because of the, like, my so-called life connections. Like, we had our Ricky, and, like, I identified with, Angela Chase, and if I had been, I was in love with Rayanne instead of Jordan Catalano, but, like, same storyline in the same halls of the same high school. Anyway, so the older gay guy said to the younger gay guy in the back of the start, he said, oh my God, you get to wear dresses to school. That is so amazing. I would have killed to be able to do that in my day, et cetera, et cetera. And it was just this very sweet, very different exchange. And I think that was sort of the first time I started to get a sense of like the queer community and how that, like, within the queer community, you have elders and you have baby gays, and the elders sort of bring the baby gays under their wing. And the reason for that is because being queer is the only persecuted minority where you're not born into a family that is also that same persecuted minority. In fact, often your own family rejects you or kicks you out or abandons you for your sexual orientation. And so you have to find your own family. And that's why back in the 90s, when being out was not as safe, we used the word family, like capital F family, as a code word. This was code for you're queer, I'm queer, I see you. So, like, if I would go somewhere to a store and people recognized I was queer for whatever reason, they would say, oh, your family. And that was just a quiet acknowledgement of, yeah, where I see you, you see me. There's not, I don't know if that term exists too much anymore because there's less need for it. But yeah, it was interesting. So I'm kind of flailing around, just getting into trouble. And pretty soon after I got kicked out, Ray dropped out of school. It was her senior year. She was so close to finishing, but and I don't know if it had anything to do with me being out of school, but she dropped out. And that's where things got like really escalating between us and really more dramatic. And I, at that point, realized I have to get her out of my life. And I have to do it in a way that I can't be living in the same area as her. That was my thought. I was like, I am so trauma bonded. I am so invested. I have such strong feelings for her that I won't be able to get out of this relationship if she's still in my orbit in any way. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but so she was homeless. She was now dropped out of school, just really flailing and floating. And she had, I think it was an aunt in Arizona that was maybe willing to take her in. And so once I found out about that, I just really, really encouraged her to go to Arizona. I said, you need to go, you should go, you need a home, you need stability. And this is all true. I mean, this wasn't like a purely selfish thing. I really cared about her. I loved her, but I was like the only person managing her. I was the only emotional, well, I guess the friend group was to some extent, but like there were no adults involved in helping this poor flailing human. She just had no support from adults, and for whatever reason. So eventually I did convince her to go to Arizona, and I bought her a bus ticket. And at that time, my parents just thought she was like my best friend. I'm sure by now they probably know that we were more than friends, but we've never had this conversation. And it was before I drove, and Ray didn't have a driver's license. So I had my dad give us a ride to the bus station. And I remember this moment pretty clearly. We were in the parking lot, and we dropped her off, and her and I, hugged for a long time and said goodbye. And as she walked away to the bus station, that's interesting. I'm getting emotional about this. When she walked away to the bus station, I turned around and I just collapsed into my dad's arms. I was sobbing, absolutely sobbing. And my father, I mean, from his point of view, I was saying goodbye to my best friend. From my point of view, I was saying goodbye to my first love. And there is no love like your first love. No matter how dramatic it was, no matter how painful it was, no matter how many bad memories I have, I loved her very much. And, but I also knew that I could not survive in a relationship with her any longer. And that was like, I guess, pretty impressive for 14-year-old me to be problem solving at that level. And that's a theme that's going to continue throughout my entire life. But yeah, that was a sad day. And it's weird, actually, that I felt so sad just reliving that memory because I pretty much stopped talking to her after that. There were no cell phones at that time. And I really was like done at that point. And once I got distance from her, I was able to realize just how much stress that relationship was causing me, and not having her in my life directly anymore was turned out to be a big relief. I feel bad saying that, but that is the case. So, and just for the record, we never really spoke after that. She occasionally would try to reach out to me on Facebook, and I just would ignore the requests because it took me a very, very, very long time to process everything I endured in that relationship and to feel okay about it and to integrate that. And I didn't see any reason, especially because I think from her point of view, she remembers it as a good relationship. She remembers me fondly because I was her anchor. But from my point of view, it was a very destabilizing, very toxic, very painful, very dramatic relationship. And compounding that with us being in the closet just was too much pressure for a 14-year-old newly budding queer that had no idea this was my first relationship ever. I couldn't sustain it. So, that's that story, and I think this is probably a good place to leave off. And next time we will talk about the solution that my parents came up with and me transferring to a new high school, and maybe I'll get another fresh start. Maybe things will improve. Maybe they'll get worse. You'll have to tune back in to find out. So, yeah, tell me about your first love. How was it? How did it end? What scars did you get from that? I'm curious to hear other people's experiences. And I will see you guys next time. Have a good day.